Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, I'm really excited to welcome Cal strength and conditioning coach Joel Smith. Joel's going to sit down and talk to us today about beating the clock, working with athletes where you can really tell with what's working, what's not, because it's all time related sports, individual sport athletes. We're talking track and field and swimming. Um, and Joel does an awesome job with the kids out at Cal. I mean, obviously his track record speaks for itself if you just look at the success they've had. But the conversation starts out talking building the general to specific, and some specific exercises that he has seen some direct carryover when dealing with his track athletes. He's also been doing a bunch lately with muscle activation techniques, and he talks for a bit about how that fits in his programming and how it's assisted in his athletes' development, and what muscle activation techniques he has been using and had the best success with, and how he's implemented them in his program. And I think that that's some pretty awesome stuff. You know, some of that Monday morning information, that you would take from a clinic, as we would say, stuff you could put in your programs right now. So that's big time that he was willing to share that. We talk a bit about his article that he recently had on FreeLap, and that was about jumping. And he talks about where he sees jumping in training, both for the swimming and diving athletes he works with, and the track and field kids, and where his programming for the jump started, and then where he sees the relationship to jumping and swimming, with his guys that he has there at Cal. And he's in another situation too with the swimming and athletes where he's got the post-grad people, the Olympians working with him as well as the men's team and now the women's team as well. It's really a neat talk, guys. Joel's got a really unique perspective of looking at things, being a track coach first and then getting into strength and conditioning. I took a ton away from it. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. Let's get right to the talk. Joel, man, thank you so much for being on today. Going to talk on a topic that we've hit with a bunch of people, starting out here, moving general to specific in the training. And since you're in a position where we can actually tell if things are working with your past with track and now, your lifelong work with swimmers, I mean, clocks don't lie. So talking with a guy who his whole career has been around cutting times, I'm excited to hear what you got to say with this, bud.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be on this interview, Jay. So yeah, definitely let's get rolling, and I'm excited to kind of share my experiences with, I guess, the world of individual sports. I feel like I'm lacking in the team sport world a little bit, but it's fun to be around the world of the clock, and where every exercise you do, you can see, is it worthwhile, is it not, and how it all works together.
Awesome. Well, then let's start first with how you put everything together with these kids.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go through. I can be long-winded. I'll try to kind of compartmentalize. I'll start with track because I'm just been transitioning more of the aquatics world of my life. I'm 32 now, and I've been involved in track since I was 14, and so I'll start with that and kind of my brief thoughts in a nutshell on like general stuff in the weight room, specific stuff in the weight room. My experience as a coach. So I coached track for I think 8 years. No, 6. Sorry, I lose track sometimes, but full time as a full time track coach, 6 years, and I was in charge of everything. I remember somebody was saying at the your seminar last year, when you're coaching track, you are the high performance manager, and so. The funny thing is when I'm actually coaching track, and then for the programs I write for online clients, where I do write everything in the plyometrics and speed and stuff, I actually don't pay as much of attention to the weightlifting as I do in my full-time job, just because I have control of the track, and the weights are a little bit towards the bottom of the pyramid. So I don't, I feel like obviously when it's part of my position at Cal, I dig into a lot more because you really want to pour yourself into what you do. But at the end of the day, it's about that stuff that's directly transferring, and how do I make that look good. So the things, strength for speed has been a very special interest of mine. It kind of, I was a generalist for most of my years as a track coach, all the way until my last. And not that I'm not now, but the first exercise, I guess you could say, that I all of a sudden was like, oh, like this is kind of specific, and yet this is kind of working. Was the barbell hip thrust for sprinters, and in a kind of a short time frame, I had, I incorporated it my last year, and I was noticing significant drops in time, specifically top end speed at the ends of races, so like the last 50 of your 200 or the last 100 or your 400. But I guess more than that, and maybe, a lot of times a drop in time could be a lot of things. I wasn't probably as aware of all the variables back then as I am now. But from a qualitative standpoint, is what meant the most to me as athletes would say, that last bit of the race, my pelvis is in a better position. Like I'm consciously feeling my glutes kicking harder at the end of the race, and so at that point, like, okay, maybe there is something there with some of these, I guess, more special and specific type exercises. And I transferred quickly over then into a full-time strength coach role at Cal, and I brought that with me. And then you start looking at every exercise from the perspective of maybe a general exercise, but you look at, okay, well, what's your posture when you're sprinting? What's your pelvis doing? And so you can certainly take general exercises and make them specific just by giving some athletes some cues and awareness, like the top of a deadlift. What are the hips doing at the top of the deadlift? How is, because of the top position, your pelvis is neutral, and you could even rotate it slightly posteriorly, and that takes a lot of the same muscle action that you're going to see in a sprint, a corresponding sprint. So it ultimately, I would say a lot of it falls back on the philosophy of the coach, because I can do all the special stuff I want in the weight room too, but if it's not corresponding with a well-planned track program, then it ultimately doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so it really is a spectrum. I think there's a lot you can do, and a creative coach wants to do a lot. But then again, there's been world champions and probably a lot of world records where an athlete didn't do a single specific thing. So it's always it's definitely a blend. But ultimately, I think there's two or three like kind of key elements there that I do think make a big difference in terms of the speed end for track and field. So being like a hip thrust and anything that an athlete can draw conscious awareness to their posture in the weight room and link it in mentally as well to what they do. I always think that does have something special to it.
No, that's really awesome. And I think that jumping back a few weeks, when Keenan was talking about all the stuff that he does with Michael, he said that that's one of the things that Michael really separates himself with, is that his ability to look at exercises and say, oh, that's going to work, or yeah, that's not going to work. And that connection is one of the things. Now, there's a lot of things that make Michael Phelps really, really fast, but that's one of the things that make him special and help all the stuff that Keenan does show up at such a high level in the water.
Yeah, absolutely. And the higher level the athlete, especially as we grow in experience as coaches and start getting around some of these athletes, you see just the difference with an athlete who is such a high level athlete, and they're going to be very meticulous about everything, and they know, like instinctually, a lot of times they know if something has that feel. And I imagine too, like Michael Phelps or some of the swimmers that I work with, swimming is such a feel-based sport. It's an unnatural world, and I'm still learning a lot on a daily basis on how it's different than track, and even the way you would approach special stuff in the weight room, I think, is a lot different than the way you would approach something special with track in the weight room, just because it's more like you got that pyramid, right? You got your competition exercise, and then your specific developmental, specific prep, general prep, and track. Some of the weight room stuff can be higher up in that pyramid, but swimming, it's kind of all on the bottom, and it's all not completely, but generally speaking, and it's a lot of it's what the athletes make and connect of it, and if they aren't connecting to what you're prescribing, then the transfer might be very dubious. They have to have obviously buy-in. But then on top of buy-in, it's how you create an environment where they can feel those exercises and say, okay, when I'm in the water, this is what my posture should be like. And yet when I bend this way or move this way in the weight room, this is what happens to me. And being around the swim coaches too, they'll be in the weight room and they'll be like, hey, that what these athletes are doing during this exercise, that's what they do in the water. But like that might not be a good thing. This is a bad thing they're doing in the water, and they're doing it in the same thing here. So it's just so much about the quality. I mean, I feel like I could do any exercises some days, but as long as I'm coaching them the right way, it's a very feel-based thing.
No, without a doubt. And I think that one of the things that you do that's different than a lot of people, um, that's really successful, is this muscle activation stuff. And I think that that's something that, with the swimmers especially, helps show up in the pool a little bit. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I guess maybe I should lead with just I've only been doing it for a short time. My worldview, I guess, in the terms of athletic performance was shaken up quite a bit last February. I went to based on the advice of Cal Dietz, I went to see Douglas Heel present, South African, physio activation specialist. I saw him present at one of Chris Corfus seminars in Chicago, and it was a really interesting thing. I came in really skeptical, and I think I even ended the first day of the 2-day seminar pretty skeptical. But after seeing the difference in myself, and as well as the after effects, once I came back, I was pretty much sold on it. And I guess in a nutshell, I don't just do that either. His therapy is based on, I guess, it's a little. I might be, I guess, a little out there for some people. It's a little dips its toes in the applied kinesiology world and all that stuff. But the bottom line is, if it works, it works. I mean, for me, I'm like, I don't care how I get an athlete to run faster or swim faster. I mean, I could, if it's whirling a baton around 3 times and bop them on the nose and they go swim a second faster, then I don't care. I don't care if I look like a fool. I just want them to be better. I mean, obviously, there are like psychological and physiological groundings to the whole system. But I've also gone through some of the MAT, muscle activation techniques, their isometric series. So that's something that's a little more, I think, scientific and practical, based on muscle feedback loops. And so, I mean, the ultimate gist of it is that, there's phasic and tonic muscles. There's muscles that, get tight, and there's muscles that get weak. And when there's muscles that go weak, and we move, let's say we sprint, the easiest example would be in sprint gait. If your glutes have gone weak a little bit, and not that they won't fire. Actually, people saying your glutes aren't firing, it's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like that term at all. I think it's more of a patterning. Does your glute fire before your hamstring fires? Does it fire before your spinal erectors? I think it's more of a muscle timing issue a lot of the time. But basically, you don't want compensators to be doing the job of the phasic muscle, and so these activation series are basically kind of a highway of sorts to restore the contractility to the muscle. And so what I'm doing, I use it especially in swim. My chapter in track and field is, I guess I'm between chapters in track and field right now. I'm more of just doing club coaching work and online stuff right now in that regard. But with swimming, we'll use that very specifically in conjunction with exercises. So, if I'm like for the swimmers, the lats are a huge muscle group. I mean, you want them to drive from the lat. The good swimmers are, insanely, obviously there's that somatotype, that body type. It's not Ronnie Coleman arms in the water. Obviously, it's those lats and those deep core muscles that are driving the movement. And so we'll spend a lot of time. We do a lot of isometrics too. So we'll do a lot of like pull-up isometrics, driving through the lats early on. But we couple that with a lot of these activation techniques, be it some of the Douglas Heel points and muscle tests, and we also do some of the muscle activation techniques, isometrics as well between. And I've had pretty good success with that. So if we're doing a pull-up workout, we always hit lat spots. We'll do activate or isometrics at sometimes. I do that with kind of my postgraduate group. They have a little bit more time, so they kind of get the full montage of things. And we'll also do that for with the postgrads especially. We'll do that for like if they squat, we'll make sure we activate glutes and psoas. And we'll do like a little VMO type stuff that I think a lot of strength coaches do. We all have our own activation, I guess, techniques and bag of tricks. You could use like a complex. You can do various band exercises and whatnot. But I've found really good success with the Douglas Heel system. And I think it makes a difference. People after being activated, they'll usually say, I feel longer in the water. Back when I was working with track, I'd activate athletes who would set a PR the next day. I mean, it's the real deal, and it's really been a useful system, and it just changes the way that I think as a coach.
So could you give an example? Let's say, since we were just talking about swimmers, you said activate the lats and you go into the pull-up work that you do. So how do you do that, and then how do you move forward through the rest of that workout?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so. How I kind of generally do it, let's like with my undergrad group where time is more of a factor. Like if they have a series of 5 pull-ups, a lot of times what I'll do is right after the first pull-up, they'll do like their lat activation series. So we all have we use a lot of Dr. Tom Nelson. He's runs a site called Activate and Dominate, and they have these self-activation sticks. They'll do their first set of pull-ups. They'll go through the activation protocol, and then they will get to their second set. Hopefully, I mean, it's both. I think it works on both the physical and mental level. Just feeling like, hey, lats, like here we go, and each set thereafter, I'll usually give them then a band exercise based on what we're looking with the scapulohumeral rhythms and whatnot. So we'll usually go activation, and then after each set thereafter, we'll do like a just like a band pullback or some sort of pull down with the scap, something like that. Saber raises. But that's kind of secondary. I like them to do the activation protocol first, and then they'll go with the band stuff, and we'll superset the sets as we go along. We usually only do one activation thing a day, just because it's a little time consuming. And it's like if I have to prioritize, I don't want to just be labeled as, I guess, this voodoo practitioner, and we do it for one thing. If I can get them to focus for one thing and they're bought into it, which is huge, I do believe it makes a big difference.
Oh, no doubt. But the thing that sells it better than anything is if they swim faster or run faster.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what matters. And when I first started doing it too, I mean, there's sometimes you'll do activation, that type of thing on an athlete, and they don't go faster too. And so a lot of it is the presentation value as well, and just allowing them time to kind of over time kind of adapt the system and start to realize what, not just the movement that we're doing, but what are the primary muscles behind that movement. And I think it all works together. I think it's an interesting system. I mean, it's almost something that's really hard to describe until you've been through it. At least the Douglas Heel activation system. The isometrics, I think we've all been through some form of those, and so yeah, again, I think it all works together.
No, and I think that's awesome. And then I guess the next question following in that is, do you work that in now when you're starting to do your specific stuff? So you're talking about the hip thrust, looking at you're finishing with the race with how your pelvic alignment stays and firing with your glutes. Do you put this in with that to help, I don't know, not to sound like Emeril Lagasse, but like kick it up a notch? Or is it something that you would keep completely separate in a general phase?
No, that's a great question. I just ran I ran like an interview with a few different speed and track coaches on my website back a few months ago, and even those coaches have different views on that. Like some will say, let the therapy do the job of activating like the glutes, and then just train how you normally would in the weight room. Whereas some people work it into everything. If I was working, just with track, like if I went back and I was just a track coach right now, how I would approach it, like for track, would be I would do the glute activation, psoas activation, and then I would do that surrounding like a 45-degree reverse hyper with a barbell or a hip thrust. Like I would want that to sit hand in hand, because it's the awareness of what's going on, I think, is just as important, and I do think you can kind of feel a better glute lock and glute contraction in that case. With swimming, I mean, I have like 15 years of track under my belt. I got a good 3 years of swimming under my belt. And I don't think I'm quite there, aside from, I've had the blessing of being able to watch, very elite swimmers, move. And I'm like, okay, like if everyone else can just move a little more like these guys, in these certain areas, I think we're in a good spot. But, the only thing that I really push is like the lat stuff, just because everything else that we do in the weight room is so, It's all just it's about the bigger picture of movement. I would say, and I'm just going through like Franz Bosch's running book right now on sprint, the sprinting action and how the biarticular muscles work in sprinting, like the hamstrings and the rectus femoris and the abs and all this stuff. And there's a very particular job that each of these muscles have to do in sprinting. I'm like, well, I barely get this with sprinting right now. I'm just figuring this out. It's going to be 10 years till I figure out
Yeah,
exactly how this goes in swimming. And no one's even written anything about that in swimming.
I
I
know.
mean, there's a little bit of stuff, but I don't think that it's really caught up with the track and because, again, you have a very instinctual thing we do from two versus a very unnatural movement at swimming. So, I would say the pull-ups is just the biggest one. Otherwise, I would just work in generalities. I usually try to make sure the swimmers like glutes and psoas are working well because I feel like that when coaches talk about the core, which is another term I don't like, but it is what it is. I like to think of it as that pairing first, because if that pairing is off, then everything's going to be off. And so we'll usually just make sure that's good a lot of days and work from there. And then pull-ups, we go lats. And besides that, I try not to be, I put my voodoo stick away aside from those things a lot of times, and then we'll just rock it from there.
No, I think that that's an awesome point. And yeah, dealing with swimmers is such a. I mean, we could just talk about how crazy the subculture is to begin with and how that impacts the rest of it. But being horizontal in an aqueous solution definitely makes all of the secondary things a little bit more interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and how you handle your posture when gravity is manipulated because you're floating, sort of, um, is weird too. It is some crazy stuff, but I think I think you might be onto something pretty neat with them, especially if it helps those kids catch higher. Because they are able to use all that and catch instead of, especially since most women catch so short.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty fascinating. It's something that it could really help out a lot of these kids technically in the water,
Oh, I agree.
which is a huge assistance. You just wrote an awesome article that was on FreeLap, and it's totally in a different segment with the jumps. Where do you see that in these two sports?
Just with the jumping mechanisms and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, track and field, I could talk for days on that. I mean, that's kind of been my. I think the first athletic skill I ever tried to do was jumping higher because I was tall and I was good at it, and I mean, I was so. Yeah, I mean, I can. Maybe I'll talk with swimming first because I think I could be a little more concise on that because I can get carried away. So swimming. Uh, yeah, it's interesting. Like I can actually tell you, there's a distinction with how I train. The men and women a little bit. I just started working with the women's squad here at Cal, and historically, there's almost always box jumps and stuff in a swimmer's repertoire, and I think it's a great thing. They want to be explosive, and obviously short course. The walls and blocks are pretty key. Paramount. So usually what I'll do, the women's team actually they do like a cardio dance a couple days a week, and I actually kind of feel like they get a lot of their explosive leg movements through that. So I don't even box jump in the weight room. I mean, we could, and they do a little, but to me, it's like if they're already doing that, just to do a couple more. I mean, we'll see it throughout the year. The guys will do it. I do that a lot of resisted jumps with them. Stuff where it's more concentric, based, like stuff where they don't have to have as big of an eccentric contraction. I will depth jump them though off a low box actually, just because the guys here are pretty good athletes. Like I actually, you hear the whole fish out of water thing, and some of them are. Yeah, I mean like distance swimmers can be that way a little
Oh
bit,
yeah.
but but I got a kid. I got a kid who's got a. I'm trying to think of what he's hit. I mean, it's something like a 56-inch standing box jump, and I got a few guys on the team with like 33, 35-inch verticals on the just jump mat. I mean, these are some pretty explosive dudes, and so I do think the depth jump does replicate a little bit of when you push off the wall, it's not just concentric only. There is the pre-tension in the muscle, like pre-tension. If you were to put an EMG on someone's leg, I mean, this is a little bit of speculation based off of how muscle action works on track and field and running, but if you were to, I would imagine if you put an EMG on someone's leg muscles right, but like the millisecond before their feet contact the wall, that there would be good muscle pretension, to load the tendons. And so I do think there's a lot of similarities in a small depth jump. We'll go like 12, maybe 18 inches sometimes for like the 50 guys, 100 guys. But I think that, has historically been something they responded pretty well to. But then I also have guys who, it's like, it's like these chemicals, if they have a certain workout in the pool and then you dump the chemical of eccentric overloading in, they will get wrecked like none other. I mean, it's like I have a K box too, and I've quickly found out that can be a swimmer's kind of best friend when they're not doing a lot of swimming, or their worst nightmare if they're doing a lot, like they're already doing a lot in the pool, and now you're throwing eccentric overloading on top of it. It's just there's way more interesting swimming is a way more interesting chemistry set than track, because the reactions that these athletes are going to have are way different than athletes who are just doing ground-based stuff all the time. And so I really do like using vertical jump for the guys, and as I move along more with the women, that'll probably be something I keep looking at. But I do think that those guys should be jumping a little bit higher every year. I mean, short course, you want to be explosive. It's a really big part of what they do, and you should get up on the blocks and think I can out jump the guy next to me. Like I'm a more explosive athlete than this guy, and maybe it's not always the most specific thing, but it's part of the big equation. So. Yeah, that's with swim. That's about it. I mean, track. Is there something like more specific in terms of like the track, the ground-based, side of things? You would want to hear from for a few minutes, or?
Well, the article was awesome, and I think that the breakdown into it was, how many pieces was it? There was the vertical part and the depth jumps. And then you had the bounding series that you were talking about. Maybe if we just kind of put that all together, kind of how you rapped about it at the end as like, this is how we can do it. Because I mean, a lot of people still don't understand a lot of those things, and the importance of extensive jumping, the importance of elasticity. And I think that's one of the big things that, especially in the demos that came off really, really well in that video, when you looked at how your bounding was so smooth and effortless, as opposed to, like when you were there, when Natalia showed those videos, and who was it? Someone doing those hurdle jumps, and it looked like Operation Dumbo Drop each time. It was like, boom, 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 instead of just being like doom, doom, doom.
Yeah.
If we could get in around that and work our way back to your progressions, I think that'd be huge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah. So I guess I'll say it. The book that changed my life. It's funny. You would never think that something you found in the back of Slam Basketball magazine would be a viable, valid scientific piece that changed your life with jump training, but it did. Like this book, The Science of Jumping. It's over a decade old. It is. I mean, I can't speak highly enough about it. The more, it's kind of one of those things where the more coaching years you get under your belt, the more you look back at the book and like, holy cow, this is genius. Just because it's so simple. The book basically, it's like, and when I did the program, I was like 16 or 17. I'd done Air Alert, and I'd done all this stuff, and like kind of plyometrics. But this was the first book where it's basically like you do one workout and you rest until you can do that workout again, and then you hit it hard again, even if it's 2 weeks. And the workout was just, really intense depth jumps, single leg depth jumps, like 360 depth jumps, lateral depth jumps, bounding. And my vertical took off like unbelievable. I tried everything, and all of a sudden it was like the magic pill. And so I've been using that type of ideal for years, obviously. And it's kind of like the anchoring bias a little bit. You weigh everything, that first thing that really works, you all of a sudden, anchor everything against it. But in kind of my 15 years since then, everything kind of weighing in and out and seeing how it works with athletes, it does really just come back to overloading the specific portions of the jump, and a lot of that's the eccentric portion of the jump. And so, kind of with that article, yeah, if you want to jump higher, you have to know how to depth jump and do it well. A lot of, and like you said, that, yeah, like the video Natalia showed, like there's way more bad plyometric videos on the internet than good ones,
Oh, no
sadly.
kidding.
Yeah, and so I mean, I would take, I've even gone to the point where during depth jumps, I'll take my phone and I'll download a little decibel meter app on my phone, and I'll put the phone on the ground right next to where they're landing, and I'll just say, okay, who can make this read the lowest? Like that's all we're working on today. Is I just want to see who can land the most softly. And the funny thing is, the guys who are the best jumpers and girls who are the best jumpers are also usually the ones who have the lowest decibel reading, and that's almost as big of a thing as how high they would do with like a reactive jump, like that they could just transfer the energy better. Specifically, like the high jumpers I've worked with, like the good ones. So yeah, I mean, doing a depth jump and doing it really well and doing it maximally, and I've almost always have an outcome goal. Like you have to, like if you're doing a depth jump outside of the teaching stages, if you're not jumping over a hurdle or doing it up to like, a target or something where there's a maximal effort, it is one of those, to me, it's kind of one of those things, well, why are you doing it? Is it just there? Is it, are you doing it because it's there? Are you doing it because you want to do something higher than you did last time, And so that's a huge important part for me. And then let's see, so you got the depth jumps. The single leg stuff is good. Lately, I've really been into all the auxiliary things. So, the single leg depth jumps, the lateral depth jumps, the 360 depth jumps. And this is actually a cool thing where maybe I can tie swimming in, is working with some of the swim coaches here at Cal. They will actually use some of the other strokes, like backstroke, to potentiate a freestyle in practice. Like they'll have athletes do a certain number of other strokes to potentiate one good run in the main event, the main stroke. And I kind of feel like it's the same way sometimes with depth jumps. That's something I've been playing with lately, is if you want to jump high, try potentiating it with some, alternate skills like 360 depth jumps, lateral depth jumps, single leg depth jumps, and use those to potentiate the main thing rather than just pounding away at the regular depth jump the whole time. You always want to make it easy. Like it's like, I'm trying to think of like spezzatura, or my coaching friend Mike Goss uses a lot in his coaching club. You want to make it look easy, and you want to use the variety of potentiators to make the main thing look a little bit easier. Because when you give your nervous system more breadth and a little bit of a variety and option, maybe even a similar concept to HRV, the variation between each heartbeat being greater, there's the greater capacity to adapt. I think it's similar with the human body. If you give it a little more variety, there's a greater ability to adapt to the main thing. So that's, with all that single leg and all the variety, I like that. And the last thing I'll mention, that the bounding complex. I'm really happy actually, it was a great compliment. You said I look smooth, because I kind of gave up. I hung it up in high jump 3 years ago. I rock climb now, and my vertical was so bad a year ago, but I made a little comeback. But the funny thing is, I went out to the grass field just a week ago, and I made my wife record me doing all those bounds, and I did I took like a minute between each one. I was kind of huffing and puffing a little bit, and and it wasn't like, when you do plyometrics, it's like, full recovery, full rest, every jump is the highest. And with depth jumps, yeah, sure. But I think with a lot of that stuff, like the bounding and some of the more elastic repeated stuff, you can do it on less than optimal rest. I'm actually a very strong believer in that. I think that's an area where a lot of coaches, because it doesn't make intuitive sense. But it's very, like after that workout, like 2 days later, I was just screwing on the weight room, and my jump was amazing. And to me, it's the coordination. It's the breadth of the nervous system that you do get on some of those diverse, a little, not super specific, same but different efforts. And it adds up to a lot of, it allows your nervous system to hone in on a specific skill better when you do close skills on short rest. And that's something I've found out lately. So that's why I love the bounding complex. That was something I got from Yuri Verkhoshansky in one of his old jump programs. And I've been doing that complex ever since, and I love it.
Oh, yeah. Now, the right, left, left. So you would call that like the threefold bounds. That's hard too. Like,
yeah.
Like for the people we're going to link the article below if you haven't read it. Read it as soon as you're done listening to this, because it's legit. It's really good stuff. Um, like that's like hard. Like I've got a lot of guys who can't do that. Like they try to do that, and it's awful.
No,
It's,
I've seen that, been there and seen that. Yeah, it can be rough.
yeah, but I think that a lot of those extensive running exercises that the Verkhoshansky's have spoken about are really some of the most underrated training means, that are out there. Any of those, which you would classify as short coupling exercises done extensively, I really think those are really big time money makers when you're looking at handling stress and not overloading kids too much. And that's obviously getting to the depth jumps is important for as your athletes progress. And everybody wants the cherry on top, as she has
Yeah.
said. But it's those early exercises and those great demos of it. I think are really important because people don't understand enough how those are supposed to really look, um, and how important they are. Everybody wants to get really caught up and thrown into all the cool, neat next thing, and there's a lot that can be done with the simple early low level stuff that builds such a huge base and improvement with people, and I think that article was so on point with a lot of it. So read that right now, y'all, when we're done. Like, flip your iPhone over, hit Safari, and run to that article and pull it up because it's real. It's really, really good. Um, so then how would any of those translate into the water?
Oh, well, that's good. So that's a good question. So basically, I guess I'll give you kind of what I've been doing the last 2 months, and most of this has been with my postgraduate swimmers. Haven't been doing it quite as much with the undergraduate groups, and largely just because it's if I'm having like, well, I'll just tell you what I'm doing a little bit for the postgrads is, I'll have them if they're doing like a squat day, and this is something that historically this swim group has done a really good job on, especially the men has just been multilateral development, especially like those early points in the year, you want to kind of cover a lot of things, just be an athlete and then obviously the specificity of the pool will handle itself later on. And so I've been doing a little bit of like low box lateral depth jumps, 360 depth jumps, not for anything specific, but just to garner skills, just to build skills. The swimmers, they definitely like to see how high they can box jump, see how high they can go and touch on the vertex, and that was just kind of my way of trying to blend it all together and build a few new skills in with it. Is it going to make a big difference? And is someone going to go out and rip like, a half-second PR because of it? No. But I think for me, it's just something that I think it's just something to keep them focused, to learn how their body moves in a different way. The height of whatever they're doing is low enough to keep them safe. So I think the biggest thing is, yeah, just like, because the ultimate specificity, I mean, and that's really just for the blocks and the walls. The ultimate specificity neurally for everything else would be, their actual kicking pattern and that type of thing. So because of that, I keep the volume pretty low. I never really want my skills I do in the weight room to interfere with whatever they're doing in the pool. I'm a strong believer in doing no harm. I have one swimmer in particular who, if he does any sort of heavy workout in the pool and I depth jump him or put him on the K box or anything eccentric, he will implode. And so it's just interesting. Like I said, there's these chemical reactions that have to be careful with. So yeah, I've just been using a little depth jump variety and trying to infuse that into helping the athletes feel a little bit better about their explosive power levels. But I wouldn't say it's a game changer. It's just something I've been doing because I think it's a nice break from the norm.
I think that's awesome. And I think that even the most awesome point about that is you need to understand that at the end of the day, what we do either needs to help them or it needs to be eliminated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you've got studs that it doesn't matter what you think, it don't work for. Studs are studs, and you got to make sure they're ready to rock and roll when they need to rock and roll, and that's That's a super point, and I think that this has been an absolutely killer talk, dude. There's so many great pieces in here. I hope people can take as much away from this as I just did, because looking at all of this over the grand spectrum, there's so much that you can do to help your kids if you just take a few of the points you made. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk with us today, Joel. This was great.
Oh, thanks, Jay. It was my pleasure being on. I really appreciate it.
And now, if people have any questions, how can they get at you social media wise?
So just check out my website, Just Fly Sports. So it's Just Fly Sports with little hashes between the words. And all my social media icons are top right in the page. Facebook is probably the one I respond most often to. So if you have questions, there's a contact us thing there. So that'll be the easiest way, and I'll usually respond pretty quick to you.
And that's just-fly-sports.com.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you so much. This was great, brother. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jay.
All right, man. We'll catch up soon.
Okay. Sounds good, man.
Again, a huge thanks to Cal's strength and conditioning coach, Joel Smith, for being on with us, guys. Joel is an absolutely fantastic dude. Check the article. We're going to post it right below here. It's really got some awesome stuff, some great insight. And, the videos, the demos in them are done really, really well. So kudos to you, Joel, for making it look so easy, because we know that it isn't, my friend. You did fantastic with it. It's something that you could use to help your athletes right away. And don't forget to check out Just Fly Sports on any of the social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, and check the website. He's got some great stuff on there, guys. He really does put out some good information. And as always, thanks for tuning in. If there's any comments, thoughts, questions, leave them below, guys. Joel is he's not a guy to hide. If you got questions, he'll answer them. So leave them below. And if you enjoyed the talk, as always, share it in the social media outlet of your choice. And we'll be back here next week, guys, with another great guest. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you then.